Imagine you are a king. Not a modern one with a social media account and a PR crisis, but a real Bronze Age Sumerian deity king. You have just defeated your neighbor, the king of Umma, in a border dispute over a very specific patch of dirt. You do not just want his land, you want his soul. So, you do something that will haunt humanity for the next 5 millennia. You pull out a clay cone, and you do math. Specifically, you charge him rent on the land he stole, but not just a flat fee. You charge him 33.3% interest compounded annually. By the time you are done scribbling on your mud football, the debt has ballooned from a few bags of barley to 8.64 million guru. To put that in perspective, that is roughly 74 million bushels of grain. It was more grain than existed in the entire known world. The king of Umma did not just owe you lunch, he owed you the future of his entire civilization. And here is the terrifying part. That exact same reparations math is why your credit card bill feels like a death sentence in 2026. You think you are participating in a modern economy? No, you are just a 21st century peasant living in a Sumerian bookkeeping nightmare. And today, I am going to show you why the delete button was removed from the world. Welcome to Sumer, 3000 BC. The air is dry, the beer is thick enough to chew, and humanity has just made its greatest mistake. We learned how to count. Before we had poems, before we had history, we had ledgers. See, the Sumerians did not invent writing to record their feelings. They invented it because they couldn't remember who owed who a goat. They lived in palace economies. Everything, the grain, the wool, the silver, flowed into the central temple and the priests tracked it on clay tablets. This was the birth of the administrative trap. In this world, money was not money, it was barley. If you were a farmer and you needed seed to plant your field, you borrowed it from the temple. But the priests were not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They understood a fundamental law of nature. Things grow. If I give you 1 bag of grain and you plant it, you get 10 bags back. So naturally, the temple wants a cut of that growth. They called it mosh. That's the Sumerian word for interest, which literally translates to offspring or goat kid. The logic was simple. Money is alive, and if it's alive, it should reproduce. Which sounds great until you realize that while a goat might die of a heart attack or a crop might wither in a drought, the math on the clay tablet never sleeps. It doesn't need water, it doesn't get tired. It just sits there in the dark, multiplying. As the centuries rolled on, the Sumerians got really good at this. They moved from barley to silver, and because silver doesn't actually grow like a goat does, they had to invent a fixed rate. They settled on a nice, easy number, 1/60th. Why? Because their entire math system was based on the number 60. It was mathematically elegant. It was also an annual interest rate of 20%. Think about that. In 2400 BC, the standard interest rate for silver was 20%. Today, in February 2026, with the global economy in a data fog and gold screaming past $5,000, your high-interest credit cards are hitting about 20 to 25%. We haven't improved the math in 5,000 years. We've just replaced the clay with silicon. This system was fueled by a terrifying invention, compound interest. The Babylonians actually wrote down math problems to train their scribes on how to calculate interest on interest. One famous tablet asks a student to calculate how long it takes for a loan to double. The answer was 5 years. This created a new class of people, the creditors. These were the temple officials and high-ranking lords who realized that you did not actually have to farm to be rich. You just needed to own the receipts. By 2000 BC, the debt-to-GDP ratio of your average Mesopotamian farm was essentially a vertical line. Small farmers were not just borrowing for seeds anymore. They were borrowing to pay the interest on the debt they took out to pay for last year's seeds. Sound familiar? It should. It's exactly how the middle class is currently trying to pay off their student loans using a line of credit they got from a grocery app.
So what happens when the math outruns the dirt? What happens when every farmer in the kingdom owes more barley than the planet can physically grow? In Sumer, this led to a very specific kind of social collapse. When you could not pay, the creditor did not just take your house, they took you. You became a debt slave. Then they took your wife, then your kids. Entire villages were being emptied of free citizens because they were all living in the creditor's basement, working off interest that, mathematically, would never end. This created a massive problem for the king. See, a king needs two things: taxes and an army. And deadbeats in a basement cannot pay taxes, and they definitely cannot hold a spear to fight off an invasion. The creditors were effectively stealing the king's population. This is where we get the first twist in economic history. The kings realized that if they did not kill the debt would kill the kingdom. So they invented the amagi. That is the Sumerian word for freedom, but its literal meaning is returning to the mother. Whenever a new king took the throne, or when the social pressure got too high, he would perform a sacred ritual. He would raise a sacred torch and declare a clean slate. Every personal debt was canceled. Every debt slave was sent home. The clay tablets, they were literally smashed into dust. It was not an act of charity, it was an act of survival. The king was essentially hitting the reset button on the game because the math had broken the world. Between 2400 and 1600 BC, this happened constantly. It was the only way civilization survived. But then the Greeks and Romans showed up, and they had a better idea. They decided that sanctity of contract was more important than the survival of the people. They stopped the jubilees. They made debt permanent. And we have been living in that no-reset world ever since. Fast forward to right now. Global debt is hovering around $350 trillion. That is roughly 350% of the entire world's economic output. We have reached the level of math. We owe more money than there is stuff in existence. But look around. Do you see any kings raising sacred torches? Do you see a jubilee for your mortgage or your medical debt? No. In 2026, we have done the opposite. We have moved the ledgers from clay tablets, which you can at least smash with a hammer, to encrypted, decentralized, quantum-proof servers. We have made the debt immortal. The Sumerians were actually smarter than us. They recognized that compound interest is an alien force. It is a mathematical curve that eventually goes to infinity, while the real world, trees, cows, your salary, grows in a straight line. Eventually, the curve eats the line. You are currently being eaten. When you see inflation devaluing your paycheck while your debt stays fixed at its original value, that is a reverse jubilee. It's the system trying to fix the math by making your life cheaper. You are not paying off the debt. You are the fuel the debt uses to keep its own heart beating. But here's the thought that should keep you awake tonight. What if the Jubilee rule never actually went away? What if the reset is still happening, but we have just forgotten what it looks like? Think about the global volatility of the last 3 years, the missing data shutdowns, the sudden spikes in gold. In the ancient world, if the king did not cancel the debt, the society would eventually just stop. People would flee to the hills, the army would desert, the empire would literally vanish from the map. What if the 2026 economic fog is not a glitch? What if it's the modern version of smashing the clay tablets? If the system becomes so complex and the debt so high that nobody actually knows who owns what anymore, that is a jubilee. But it is not a peaceful one with a torch in a parade. It is a dark jubilee. It is a world where the records do not get erased, they just become irrelevant because the currency they're written in no longer buys bread. Imagine a world where you wake up tomorrow and your bank balance says $1 million, but a gallon of milk costs $900,000. Your debt is gone, sure, but so is the world that gave that debt meaning. We are waiting for a king to raise a torch, but we might just get a world that runs out of light. Sleep well. The next time you look at your credit card statement and feel that soul-crushing weight, just remember, you are not a failure. You are just a casualty in a 5,000-year-old math war that your ancestors lost before they even learned how to build a wheel. If you would like to be the one holding the hammer when the next set of digital tablets finally breaks, you should probably subscribe. Consider it your survival clause for 2026. I can't pay your debt for you, but I can at least tell you which direction the system is leaning before it falls on your head. I'm Knox.
Try not to borrow any barley this week, or if you do, check the interest rate first. And if you want to see which modern empire is fumbling its clean slate even worse than the Sumerians, click the video on the screen. It's about the $200 trillion silver ghost that is currently haunting your savings account. See you in the wreckage.